Here at Be Freaking Awesome, we believe that life is too short to be anything less than extraordinary. Join us as we explore what it means to live authentically, grow continuously, and have a blast while doing it. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Be Freaking Awesome. I'm one of your hosts, Kinnison, here with Angela Belford. And today we are joined by a very special guest, DonJay Rice. And we are going to be talking about sort of the intersection of money and grief and faith and all sorts of things. Really and truthfully, I feel like the three of us probably could sit on a call for hours and hours and hours. But don't worry, listeners, this is not going to be a multiple hours long podcast. We'll save that for you. But we are really excited to just jump in and have some deep conversations today. Before we do that, DonJay, do you mind just taking a moment to introduce yourself and tell people who you are and what you're all about?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. Love listening to you guys. Learn so many things. Yeah, I'm a financial coach, a certified financial behavioral specialist. Um,
Hmm.
is the official title. Yeah, it's got to sound impressive. Basically, my job is helping clients when their relationship with money has gotten impacted by grief or trauma. I hold a board certified trauma informed coach. I'm a board certified life coach, certified Enneagram coach, and that's enough titles. And so, so that's kind of what I do for a profession. Um, in volunteer work, I serve in a ministry that helps people that are coming out of homelessness and domestic violence. And that's another way I can use my financial psychology background for that. Um, and then I just love anything art, anything sketching, painting, anything like that. Playing board games with family and
Mm.
friends is great. And so, yeah, so that's me.
Real quick, do you have a favorite board game?
Favorite board game, definitely Monopoly.
Ooh,
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
I also am a board game enthusiast, and we are constantly just getting new games all the time. My husband and I are playing. We're finding ways to play multiple player games with just two people.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, we'll play a Settlers of Catan with four players, and the two of us operating two players each. We get real intense about it.
That's
um.
hilarious. I was gonna say
Anyway,
when you said favorite board game, I'm like, "Ooh, definitely Risk." And then I'm like, "That's funny because I hardly ever play it because it's one of the few games that I will most games I play to have fun, and it's the only game I play to win." And so, like, my kids growing up, it was like, Mom, please, 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 we play when they were teenagers, and when they got to the point they could, start beating me, I was like, yes, good, because I would not go easy on them.
No, and I distinctly remember one time asking you, "Can we play Risk?" And you were like, "We can only play Risk if you promise that you won't cry when I beat you." And what's funny is that in a lot of families, that would be like a funny smack talk thing, and in our family, it was this is a real conversation, and I'm not willing to put up with your tears for being a sore loser, and
Oh,
I
my.
need to know that you're not gonna cry. And that day, when she beat me, and I held my breath in and I said, "Okay, mom, good game. I love you. I'm going to go take some time to go read by myself in my bedroom now. I'm not going to go cry. I'm fine." And I go to my bedroom so I can let it all out because I thought so sure that I was finally at the point I would get her. I would beat her in this one. And it did not.
And
Did not
every
work out.
other game, 99 out of 100 other games I play, I don't even care. Yeah, let's go. And I will play hard, but I don't like it's like, "Oh, I lost, no big deal." But man, I
Yeah, good
it's
thing
so
you guys
funny.
don't play spoons on a normal basis.
I know, right?
Yeah,
I don't
it could get really, really
well, I mean,
dangerous.
we're all very competitive and very intense in our family, but that one, I'm like, "Mm-mm, I'm not interested in going easy on you." Anyway, okay, that's not what we're
Interesting.
here to talk
No, but
about.
I will say there is a segue from competitiveness to money because I'll tell you if any I don't know that this is what the plan was. If somebody's going on a hot seat, I have money baggage of competition that I'm like, no, you have to win. You have to do this because that's just what we do in life. That I've had to like work really hard to be like, it is not about competition. Number one. Number two, it's okay to air quotes lose because there's not, life is not the board game of life. There's not actually a lose moment. Anyway, and so I think that talking about our money stories, there you go. I'll just leave that to be a segue enough that I have a lot of money stories that are related to competition.
Hmm.
And I think that it's interesting the breadth of stories people tell themselves about money. I think it's interesting because otherwise we might cry about it sometimes. And so you're like, no, let's think about it objectively, third person, like we're not the ones there. But it really is something that everybody interacts with in some way, shape, or form. That you've got a story that you're telling yourself about money, good, bad, ugly, all around. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so true, Sammy. I mean, great job for you for recognizing that, because so many of us go through life and just think, well, money's just this piece of paper. At least that's what we consciously think. But subconsciously, we have all these stories about what money is and what money isn't. And it really started from our first memory, of money,
mhm.
um, from that standpoint. So money is sending us these messages throughout our entire lives. And it's us really processing those and saying, wait a minute, maybe that's how I used to think about it, or how I did think about it, or how I currently do, but I don't have to think about it that way,
Mm.
you know?
Mm.
Yeah, the rules
So
don't
yeah,
have to stay what they've always been.
no, mm-mm, yeah.
So you mentioned that you work at the intersection of grief and money. And when we were chatting before this started, I was at first going, what? Say more words. And the example that was like, oh, for me, as you were explaining it, is when someone gets an inheritance, right? And so I now have a pile of money, some amount of money that is because I lost my dad, I lost my mom, my grandma died. I now have money, and so I have several curiosities about that. One, how did that become your kind of focus of practice? And then number two, what are you going to teach us about that? So I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, you. But like, how can we? What are we here to learn about? So,
yeah. So that's for me, it was a journey, and I started back in, umpteen years ago as a financial advisor. And as a financial advisor, I'd been in business maybe a couple of years. And so, a couple of years in business, you don't have that many clients, of course. And I had 3 clients die like in the same month. And
mm,
and that's a lot, especially when you're just getting started out. And so what's interesting is, so the widows came in, and the widows had always attended the meeting, but it seemed like in this situation, the male always kind of drove the conversation. And so I brought him in, and I kind of, went through the paperwork and all those type of things. And then within 2 weeks of doing that paperwork with each of these 3 widows, the whole account moved to another firm. And I went, wow, what's going on here? And so I went into kind of analytical mode, and I said, all right, maybe these widows knew each other. Like, one widow had the idea to move out and the other ones followed. No, no 3 of them knew each other. Did they go to the same firm? No. There was nothing in common except one element, and that was me. So I
mm,
had
Mm.
to get out the mirror and stare in the mirror for a little bit and say, what did you do? And as I thought through it, I thought, well, yeah, you were all about the mechanics of it. Your accounts up, blah, 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 and da, 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 and let's fill out these forms. And you had no empathy. You had no helping them through all of these emotions. And
mm,
what was interesting, and so that was 1998, and right then was when online trading was happening, right? E-trade, all those things were coming onto existence. And so before, if you wanted to buy a stock, you had to come through a human. And for the first time, you didn't have to do that. If you knew what you wanted, just go online and go get it. And it was just really interesting how those two intersected at this point in time. And I said, if I don't start to help clients embrace the emotions behind money and grief, like, I won't have a job. I was fully convinced like the technology would just do away with me. I mean, what do you need a machine? That's all I was acting like was just this machine. And wow, we already have one. It's called the internet. And
Mm,
so that's when I really started on a search and a journey of like, what's the right way to do this? How do I do this? How do I learn more? And of course, back then, financial psychology wasn't even a thing. And so it
mhm,
was finding books and grabbing things and just learning as you went. Now, since then, I've went on and got my master's cert in financial psychology and behavioral finance, and all those good, wonderful things. But it was just a journey of,
mm.
but that was a wake up call for me from that
Oh,
standpoint. So,
I think that's really interesting because I think not everybody would take that ownership, would take that, well, I was the common factor here. What can I do different? And Angela, I know I was like interesting to bring up the statistic with a person who does financial advising for people. That there, I can't remember the exact number, but it's a crazy high statistic that when the husband passes, the widow will change firms.
but John
Um,
Jay's the one that taught me that statistic.
oh, okay. Well,
yeah,
yeah, I was
yeah.
like,
Actually,
and
yeah,
so
it's from us being
It's
friends
been
for the last 4 years,
Yeah.
so
It's
yeah,
between 80 and 9 it's between 80 and 90%. I mean, it's
yeah.
high. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's crazy to think about if you aren't taking care of one, the holistic account, not just who you might think is the decision maker, but
Mhm.
also that noticing that you do really have to be there for the emotions. And then Angela, it made me think about your journey as well in the coaching that you're doing now with people where you help them with their business operations and you help them see that showing up with the most efficient business operations doesn't help when somebody comes into the office and is crying, and doesn't help when your board member is your mom who is upset that you wanna change the name of the business. I don't know, whatever it might be, that it's
right.
the emotions underlying. Anyway, interesting to see the similarities between the 2 of you in 2 different aspects of business and life, and yet it's the emotions underneath that have to be addressed that we go and ignore for so long.
Yeah, and the kind of the little quote on my book, Traveling Light, says, "This is a guide for people who were told to quit crying, or I'll give you something to cry about." Because those of us of a certain age were taught that why cry about it? We grew up in what now I would probably say is pretty close to toxic positivity. The power of positive thinking has its place, and most often as humans we take it too far, and just what I focus so much on is teaching people to slow down and just like take a minute. This sucks. Like it will get better. You will survive. But for today, it's terrible, and let it be terrible for a minute. And I would imagine as you like actively choose to go, you've actively chosen, Don Jay, to a very hard place to come and help people,
Yeah.
like actively choosing, and that takes so much courage, and I'm super impressed. So what are some of the things that maybe some tools that you've had to we talk a lot on this podcast about adding tools to our toolbox. So are there some specific tools that you see kind of universally that you have to help clients add to their toolbox?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, each case is has its own uniqueness, right? Just like we always want to with grief, not compare grief.
Right.
So there's always a certain uniqueness involved, and there's always a certain, like you just mentioned, of approaching that change and in layers and letting it work its way. But I would say the first things, if you have listeners out there like, hey, I don't know, I've never thought about this. How do I start looking into this? Would be to get a feelings wheel. And
Mm,
there's plenty of those online that are free that you can download. And most of us just center around the emotions of mad, sad, happy.
right.
Mhm.
But there's not mad, there's disappointed, there's joyful, right? There's I think close to 80 different emotions on most of those feelings wheels. And so it would just be doing that. And then what I encourage people to do is journal for about 30 days, longer, but at least 30 days, and start writing down like what was it like today for money, you know? And
Mm.
so it might be, um, boy, I went into the shoe store and I saw an expensive pair of shoes, and I was feeling anxious, that I shouldn't buy them, but I went ahead and just grabbed them and threw them on the counter and bought them, and I'll figure it out later. And now I'm feeling a little remorse, you know. And
Mm.
so just doing that, right? Or like you mentioned, the inheritance, I don't want to look at the money. Um, I want to act like it's not there, for whatever reason, right? It might be that, and that's what's really neat about this business is no 2 days are the same, right? So
Mm.
Angela could get an inheritance and say, I don't want to look at the money because, it just reminds me of the person that passed away. Or I got this money and we didn't have a real good relationship. Um, and now I'm feeling guilty that I've got this money. So I'll just avoid it. I'll just put it in the checking account,
Mm.
never look at it again. And Sammy might get an inheritance, maybe even from the same person, right? But she's got this money concept of like she's always wanted money, and she's always wanted it from a standpoint. I'm going to paint you as an evil person here, not evil, I'm just joking, but
Yeah, yeah,
um
yeah.
but you've always wanted this money from the standpoint of like, I'll show them, I'll show the
Mm.
world I've made it, right? And
Mm.
so you've now got this money and you are eager to spend it, like you're eager to let us know you've got it, right? um, and so we can have all of these different things that are from our past story, right? um, you could Sammy say, I'm avoiding the money also, right? And so I might say, well, Angela was estranged, so I guess Sammy was estranged from this person too. No, Sammy's avoiding the money because she grew up with a money message that money is evil.
Mm.
And so now I have all this money, but money's evil. Like, how do I balance these two? I'll just avoid it. So so it's really interesting from that standpoint. But it's first journaling and getting curious of like, why did I react that way?
I think from my upbringing, I assume one, I often assume that other people were taught the same things that I was growing up. Obviously, the older I get, the more you like really solidify. Definitely not. And so in our house, we talked about money a lot. It was something that was common. I went to um camps at the business school in town
Oh
to
wow.
teach you how to do a lemonade stand, but like, more than that. I don't even remember all sorts of things. It was like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory where we pretended to make a chocolate factory. Part of it being that my mom wanted to make sure that her children grew up financially literate. That was something, Angela, you didn't have growing up. You had to be self-taught, and it was really important to you to make sure that we were literate when it came to money. I think me and my siblings take that really for granted a lot because we just assume other people know things about money that they don't. That really came to a head in my marriage when, like, if I would ask my husband, what's like his money story or what does he think about money? He's like, I don't think about money at all. And yet I could see blaringly obvious where he's constantly thinking about money and he's always thinking about, like, it's always there. And he's like, I'm not thinking about money. And I'm like, but you are. And here are these things. And so I think that if you think you don't have a money story, you do. You 100% have lessons you've learned about money. You have things that you've carried with you, even if it is unconscious and things you aren't aware of, or things that you would say, this isn't my story about money, this is my story about success, or this is reputation. And it's like, does that come back to money or not? Even some of the fights that I had with my mom as a teenager, we did not fight very often. Almost every single one of the fights was about money. Um, I love your face right there. You're like, "What? Do you not remember this? Do you not remember telling me that I" Oh, I remember this very clearly. "You get a C in your math class. That C is gonna make it harder for you to get a
Oh.
scholarship. That making it harder for you to get a scholarship means that you're gonna have student loans, and if you have student loans, you're gonna be poor and have to work hard all of your life, and if you don't turn in your homework, you're gonna be poor and have a hard life." And it was like, "Mom, I just wanna, like, listen to music and not talk to you. Don't make me go do my homework." But it was like, if you don't do your homework, this
We
is going to
have
lead to.
we have very different remembrances of that conversation because
Of course we do, because
I
I was
think
15.
I think I remember saying I do remember trying to help you make those connections. Like, do you understand the implications? Because it would be like, well, who cares if I get a C, right, in calculus? And I remember having to get to the point where I was like, look, I value our relationship. So as long as you know the consequences of you getting a C, I'm not going to ride you anymore. You now are enough. Like, if you want to get a C, because it is more important for me to have a good relationship with you than it is for you to have a 4.0 GPA. And that means something about me because I can't do this. And so I would say when it came to grades, I had very little that I like got on my kids about unless they weren't trying. That's
Yeah.
what that would be the thing you would get in trouble for. I don't care what the grade is. Did you try? Did you work hard? If you didn't work hard,
Yeah,
like it's on.
my D borderline C in physics was a different story than my B in English. My B in English I got in trouble for because I was good at English and there's no reason I should have gotten a B. My
Right.
C or D in physics, I worked hard for that C. Like
Right.
I
And I
gave it
just
my
am like,
all.
give it do your best.
But it was
But
interesting where homework did get tied into the money story. Like even
Sure.
something as simple as
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing with like money stories is it's not, you know, each of us interpret those things differently,
Mhm.
and so, and some of us just aren't aware. And so, I see that working with clients is it takes time to engage in that. And like I used an example and said, okay, we're going to use Sammy in a bad way. I really shouldn't have said that, right? It's just the way it was, right? And so
Mhm.
some people through their messages are taught to maybe really use money as a way to keep score, maybe even a worshiping sense, from that standpoint. But it's all so interrelated to our past, and so I'll give you a great example. My past is reason I focus on grief and trauma was I was a had a lot of childhood trauma that started at age 8, went into age 12, was really a daily drip of trauma all the way through age
Mm.
26. And it was and that was some things that I really buried inside of myself for a long time and didn't want to address. And um, it was going back and addressing it and finding, yeah, there was brokenness there, but there was beauty in that at the same time. But one of my messages that really stuck with me, um, and so it's here again, just getting curious because with my family, um, I married, children, 2 daughters, and I had no problem spending money on them for them to enjoy something.
hmm,
But if it took to me spending money on myself for only me to enjoy, couldn't do it. Couldn't do it,
mhm,
felt guilty, wouldn't do it. And I had to really sit with myself and go like, "Why is that? Like, why is that?" Um, and it dated all the way back to my mom and dad's 25th wedding anniversary. And so I grew up in extreme poverty. And so my mom and dad had their 25th wedding anniversary. The church um, found out about it and said, we're going to take up a collection to that my mom and dad could go to the most expensive restaurant in the county, you know, order anything they want. There's still going to be money left over. Our neighbor who went to the same church said, "Hey, we're going to babysit, DonJay
Mm.
and his brothers, and so they get to spend the night." I mean, perfect, right? And so I come home the next day, and of course, being poor, we never ate fast food. Like that didn't happen. We had a garden, raised our own food, all that, grew our own food, all that stuff. And so I look in the trash, happen to look in the trash, throwing something away, and there's Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? Um, boxes and bags. And I'm like, "Hey, mom, like, what's going on with that?" And she said, "Well, uh, I decided, and your dad agreed, that we would just get takeout and bring it home and save all the extra money for you and your brothers for clothes."
mm,
Mm.
Right. And so you think about that in and of itself, it's a beautiful story. I mean, and that's who my mom
Yeah.
was. It's a beautiful story. But And I admired that story so much
Mm,
that it taught me you don't spend money on yourself to enjoy no matter
hmm,
what,
wow.
right? And
Wow.
so those are the
Yeah.
things in our that happens with our money,
Yeah.
right? And so, um,
I do have a
yeah, it just
question
go ahead.
related to that. And because we had a month last year where I said we're asking the wrong question. And one of the questions that I kind of, and we also, we like to be controversial here a little bit. This is the depth of
I
my
can't imagine
controversy.
you,
I
Angela,
know you're
ever being,
shocked.
yeah, yeah.
I know you're shocked. But the thing is that what happens if I notice this thing about me and I don't know why? I can't remember a story because I get this a lot from clients where they're like, they don't remember the 25th anniversary
Yeah, yeah.
thing. What in words of encouragement would you have if I don't know the why and I can't remember the origin story?
Yeah, that's a great question because the first thing we usually do is go to frustration, right? Like
Right.
I can't get this and I need to figure this out and I need to do it like now. And
Right.
that's the worst thing for our mind, right?
Right.
So it's first saying like this will come as long as I'm open, as long as I'm curious. Um and so the first thing is just let the stress off. Like it'll
Mhm.
come.
Mhm.
A thing I do with my clients is we do what's called a money memory timeline. And
Mm.
so I'll have them put a piece of painter's tape on a wall somewhere in private and just start putting sticky notes up there, approximate
Mm.
ages. And I break it down into age categories, but because there's some things behind that. But so I just have them start anything that they feel was a good money memory
Mm.
gets a post-it note above the line at the approximate age, and
Yep.
anything they feel like was, I don't know, bad money memory or a little disappointing, whatever, is a post-it note below the line. And it just starts opening our mind up, right? And so, and I have them leave that up for a little period of time, um, because you'll say, "Oh yeah," and then there was this, and oh yeah,
Yeah.
and there was that,
Yeah.
and that's the thing, like with journeying with clients it's not uncommon to be a couple months into coaching and they thought, "Well, I thought I told you everything, but then today, like I remembered this and it's like
Mm.
and it's the thing, right? It's the thing that
Right.
unlocks everything." And so so I would say the other thing is a money memory timeline. Now, I would caution people, especially people who've had grief or trauma, right? That can get tough and
Mhm.
so there's some things to do, like if it's getting too much, take a break,
Mhm.
do some breathing exercises, some things of that nature. And so I walk clients through that. But and then if you come back and it's still too much, and you come back and it's still too much, hey, this is a time to really maybe get a therapist involved or a financial coach or a grief coach or whatever it might be. But yeah, it's just letting discovery take its course. Yeah.
Well, and what I encourage people to do is it's okay if you don't remember the origin story. It's okay to decide this is how I've done it in the past. I'm now aware of this. How do you want to do it in the future?
Yes.
What do you
Yes.
want to be different? And so I encourage people that it's like, if you happen to remember the story, and my practice is a lot about feeling the emotions in your body and then finding out what that sensation in your body is telling you. And it's been fascinating when they're like, we think we're talking about this thing and then all of a sudden we're like, okay, well, ask that sensation, what information does it have? And this story will pop up that is
Yeah.
completely unrelated. Like you said, the discovery may happen at some point, but I also tell people, like, there are memories that for me, my mom died when I was 8, and from like 5 to 8, when she was diagnosed with cancer when I was 5 to 8, it's very sketchy.
Sure.
And yet there are other times when I was with my grandma during that same time frame, that the memories are super, like, very very clear for me, so it's not just like I have this whole swath. I also have a season of my life where I had trauma, and when I forgave the person that caused the trauma, it was interesting how it unlocked a lot of memories for me because before I did the forgiveness work, everything when I lived with that person, my stepdad, that whole 2 years was horrible, horrible. And then when I finally did enough the forgiveness work, then I found out that kind of what was actually so traumatic is that originally he and I were super close, right? And then I could be okay with remembering he's the one that insisted I learn how to change my own flat tire, and I made sure my children knew how to change their own tire, that was when you learn to drive, you learn to. And
Oh, yeah.
until I did that forgiveness work, I couldn't even give him credit that he had made a positive impact because he was
Yeah.
the source of trauma, and like the balance of that. And so I think about all of that interwoven with money because we want as humans to be like it's all bad or it's all good. This person
Right.
was all bad or this person was all good. My
Right.
mom was amazing. She was a saint. She sacrificed her 25th anniversary to do all these things. And your mom may have been made some bad decisions, or
Sure.
your mom may have said some things that hurt your feelings, right? And like
Right.
that willingness to be both and to hold that tension. And I would imagine when you get into like the intersection of grief and money, that tension just gets kind of exponential a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and you bring up a good point, Angela, and that's the thing through my business with the coaching is it's just, it's a journey. And
Mhm.
so it's not like, well, we haven't completed your money timeline, so we got to stick right here, right? It's just like,
Right.
okay, that's fine. You got 3 things on it. Great. Let's talk about those 3 things and then let's move forward here and like you say, then it'll just be like this, "Oh, I remember," or,
Mhm.
"Well, I don't." Oh, okay, then let's just go to what do you want to do? This is
Mhm.
what you're doing that you don't like, but what do you wanna do? And so
Mhm.
some things, yeah, we just have to, like, let them be. Just let them be. So
Mhm.
So, to throw myself in a little bit of a hot seat again, this is bringing up for me right now with my in-laws. They are my husband's grandparents are all approaching sort of end of life. And the conversations that are happening is fascinating from a outsider's perspective. From an insider's perspective, it's hard and heavy.
Sure.
But I sometimes will joke, I'll be like, "Me, the granddaughter-in-law, I have a lot of, like, research and knowledge on these things, but I'm just the granddaughter-in-law, who's gonna listen to me?" It has been interesting, though, the to see all of the emotions play through in the conversations. For example, my mother-in-law's dad doesn't want to spend money on long-term care facilities because that money is his children's. That belongs to his children. That's his children's inheritance. So I shouldn't take care of myself right now because how am I taking care of my children after I pass? Even though him not taking care of his children or him not taking care of himself right now is making it significantly harder for his children in the present for this hypothetical
Yeah,
future for all of these things. It's been super hard to walk through with them and just, like, I feel like I get to just be an audience member because, I mean, I have opinions and I have thoughts on things, and it's not my dad who's having
sure.
to do this. It's not it's a little bit more separated.
Yeah,
I feel like it's such an death that I'm really embracing that death is such a part of life, and having these conversations proactively, having conversations with people before they are less mentally capable, before they are at a spot where it's harder to make decisions, it just seems so important and continues to be really evident for me every time we talk with them about how hard all of these conversations are. And I don't know, I'm just spinning. I'm now thinking of all the people and their money grief stories and all the
Mhm.
ways that it just can
Well,
impact us.
I've never even said that sentence until this today. Your money grief story, right? So I'm thinking about your money timeline that you just talked about. Well, I've done the grief recovery handbook and talk about it in my book about and that methodology of like when you map out your grief, your relationship timeline, and positive and negative, and getting a more balanced approach. And I've done all this work on money, and I just love this intersection of like, I've never thought, like, I'm the one, and we joke about that. I told my therapist up in, in as late as 2021, I don't need to grief. I don't need to worry about my grief. I would be like, why am I angry all the time? She goes, because you won't work on your grief. I've been to therapy. I've been to therapy. I don't understand. Why do you mean this? What? Look, I could cite the times when I went to therapy and talked about this thing, and she goes, I don't care. You're still not processing your grief.
Yeah.
And so I now to even like add that of like, so much of it, so many of us avoid grief, and so many of us avoid money. And then now to go like, what is your grief money story? What is your, and I'm like, whoa, mind blown just a little bit. So
Yeah. I also, a couple weekends ago, or at the beginning of the year, really, my husband and I took a weekend to just the two of us to go plan out our year. And one of the agenda items was finances. And I kept putting it off, and I would be like, oh, we should take a nap first instead. Like, oh, let's play a board game first. Like, let's have a snack. And then he's like, hey, while I was taking a nap, he started prepping stuff for the conversation because he didn't go take a nap. And I just remember like even going into it being like, we have been together for over a decade. I have a lot of trust with this human being. He and I have processed a lot of our money stuff, and still to pull up all the bank accounts and to pull up all of the things like made my heart race, made me get sweaty.
Yeah.
We had to be super on purpose to, we would say out loud, okay, this one's heavy for me. I feel XYZ. For now, I'm going to put XYZ on the shelf, and we're going to talk about the logistics because we got to get through the logistics of these decisions. And interestingly enough, we got to the end of it and I was like, we did that and we're both safe and everything's fine. Wow, that was unexpected. He kind of laughed a little bit. And I was like, I think I need more of these safe money conversations to help me not feel so anxious and get so worried that it's going to turn into a yelling
argument.
match
Yep.
money conversation.
Yeah.
So we actually put it in kind of a goal, but at the end of each month this year, we're going to have a lunch date. We wanted it to be during the day so the kids aren't around, where we look at our money with the goal of having a safe money conversation.
Mm.
So I don't actually know what we're talking about, but just like assessing where we are, what happened, what did we spend our money on? Is that good, bad? Do we need to make adjustments so that we can add safe conversation after safe conversation to be like, okay, cool, we got reps. Maybe we can have these conversations in a safer way. So
Yeah.
it's interesting how we are actively trying to rewrite a new story knowing that we've had a lot of times where when we talk about money, it led to his past was different with money than my past. Earlier, where I talked about he thought he didn't have a money story, and me being like, ah, you do. That was a
We
lot
all
of
do. Yeah.
arguments. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, that was a lot of arguments. I don't think I had clarified that specifically, but it's a big yelling match. Anyway, I'm hopeful for this year for myself that, and for anybody listening, if you're like, I don't really talk about this, jump in, join me in the challenge, come on in, water's fine. I don't know.
And
It's having those reps is what I'm hoping will make a difference.
and I think you point out something really wise there, Sammy, is it's not we want to schedule those type of conversations between spouses. Like we want those to be scheduled so that we can in our mind and hearts enter into that space, right?
Mhm.
So you guys doing it, it's like, hey, this is a scheduled time. We know what we're going to talk about, right? You guys can both go, you can take a deep breath and go, okay, it's that money stuff. All right. All right. Yeah, I'm prepared, right?
Yeah.
Versus, right? Versus if it's like, my wife's walking by and I'm laying on the couch and I say, hey, why did we spend this much on the credit card yesterday? Right. Now,
Yes.
I may be asking from a total like, I just want to make sure it's not fraud, right? But her money message might be a very judgmental, shameful message.
That's
And so
super
she might,
interesting, the
yeah.
hypothetical. That's not happened in my house ever. Never one time has that exact scenario happened in my house. What a great hypothetical.
If you watch on YouTube, you'll see that Angela's face just showed that it is not maybe hypothetical in our house either.
But yeah,
Mm.
and I think it's just understanding that and just, being vulnerable enough to be open about our emotions. Hey, right now I'm feeling with what you said, right? So my wife might say, with what you said, I know you didn't mean it this way, Don Jay, but I'm feeling a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. Right.
Mm,
And for her to say that, then I'd come back and go, I did not mean that. Here's what I meant from like I was concerned this was fraud because I didn't even know you went to town yesterday to go shopping,
right.
Okay, right. But like you say, but usually we don't do that, right? Usually if I'm unprepared, I go into, either fight or flight mode or fawn or whatever, right? Um, and then I save those things up for next time to do battle, and that's just there's nothing, right, for our listeners
Yeah,
to understand, like we're just we're just human, right? There's no guilt in that, there's no shame
Right.
in that. It's just understanding we are human, and just like our
Mhm.
grief and our money and whatever we do with it, like we're human, but because we're human, we have the ability to grow and change. And
Mm,
so, and it's like I'll share with you a little bit of my wife and I's money story. So I grew up in poverty. My wife grew up not in poverty, but in tough times. So her daughter or her dad was a barber during the 1970s when not cutting your hair at all for guys was the in thing, right? So imagine now all of a sudden, right? We went from income's good, we're doing okay, and now fashion has changed and nobody's coming in anymore, or incomes went in
yeah.
half, right? And so
Mm,
with my childhood poverty, my dad was the type that you can figure your way out of anything. And so with our poverty, we created we got an orchard, so we raised fruit, we canned it, we sold it. We got a quarter acre of ground that became a garden. Did all that. We made some furniture. All these things. We had 200 chickens and sold the eggs. Of course, the boys were all involved in those chores pretty deeply. Um, but um, but so it was this message, right? My money message was even in poverty, you will find a way out. So have
mm,
confidence in yourself and your abilities. Kalisa's message, her message was hunker down. So her father, that was when he started tearing Kleenexes in half and sticking them back in the tissue box, telling everyone, your nose probably only needs half a Kleenex, not a full one, right? So her message was hunker down, right?
mm,
And so when she was 10, which was during the 70s, there was a tornado that went by their house. And so they all had to gather in the bathroom, the basement. They had a basement time, the basement. And so she always wondered, like, why, her other siblings grabbed a blanket, they grabbed a pillow, she grabbed her piggy bank. And she's
mm,
always like, why did I do that? And I'm like, because you were taught by your dad hunkering down that this was the most valuable thing and you needed to protect it.
mm,
Right. And so it's just understanding, right? So when we talk about our budget and wow, things are tight this month, right? She thinks
mhm,
hunker down and I think grow my way out of it, right? Just make more income. And
mhm,
so it becomes frustrating to me, right? When she says, well, let's cut this expense. I used to take it as, well, you don't
mm,
have confidence in me that I can do this. She didn't mean
mm,
that at all, right? But
right.
that's the way I took it. And when I would say, well, we're going to do this and do that, and she's thinking, don't you know we have like a little mini crisis on our budget here? Like, why are you being so irresponsible? Right?
Yeah.
So it's just understanding, the more we can just be curious and try to
Yeah.
understand our story, the more, I do couples coaching also. And it's just understanding that about us. And the Enneagram fits into that, as far as understanding the differences and making room in the budget for both maybe an Enneagram 1 and Enneagram 7 that tend to marry each other. And so, yeah, so I just love what I do. It's interesting, it's fascinating, and
Awesome.
it's just about helping people live a fuller, joyful life, really.
I love that. If you had one piece of advice or parting wisdom you wanted to leave people with, what would you like to say?
Boy, that's a great question. I would say it's just having grace for yourself. And so
Hmm.
a lot of times during this money discovery, guilt, regret, shame come in, right?
Mm,
Um, and so
Yeah.
it's just having grace for yourself and saying, hey, that it just is what it is. Doesn't mean it
mhm.
has to be that way going forward. And just telling ourselves like we don't know what we don't know. So for me, a lot of my grief represented came out in anger, came out in a desire to overachieve and overperform, um, and all these type of things. And you can just go, you didn't know what you didn't know. You know,
Right.
when I grew up, the word childhood trauma did not exist, and the ACE score did not exist, and so you didn't know. And so I
Right.
would just tell people, just give yourself a lot of grace in life. Grace isn't an excuse,
Mm,
but it's to not get hung up in this guilt and regret and shame.
mm.
So, yeah.
I love that because I say to people, they're like, "Oh, I just feel so guilty." And I'm like, "Is that helping you?" Because real honest guilt is recognition of something I've done wrong to motivate you to do something better,
Right,
right?
right,
Whereas shame is actually says there's something wrong with me. And so I'm like,
yeah,
that's very rare. There are very few examples of shame actually motivating you to do something because it's saying there's something wrong inherently with you. But real guilt, what are you doing?
yeah,
Right? Like if you did something wrong, what are you doing? Are you going to make it right? Are you going to apologize? Are you going to ask for forgiveness? And if the person has passed, like, are you going to make some sort of restoration? I can say something like, I'm going to go plant a tree. I'm going to make a donation on their behalf. I'm going to do something, right? If it's guilt that does not motivate you to do something, and to make your life better, then it is wasted. It's
yeah,
absolute wasted emotion, and you are draining your energy. And so there are people will tell me all the time, I just feel so guilty. And I'm like, how's that helping? It's not helping anything. So
yeah,
so it's you know, my coach would say that's an indulgent emotion. You just are enjoying
yeah,
staying there, right?
yeah,
And it really isn't helping anybody for you to be guilt ridden. So that's so good. I love that. Grace. This has been
Mm.
amazing.
Thank you so much, DonJay, for joining us for this conversation. If people want to find you, they want to connect with you, reach out and see what you have to offer, how can they find you?
yeah. Probably the easiest way is just to go on the old web, um, drumbeatofwealth.com. So
Mm.
drumbeatofwealth.com.
Okay, we'll
Love
put that
Yeah,
that.
link in the show notes for
yeah,
everybody so you
yeah.
guys can get that real easy. But thank you guys so much for listening. And if you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, go to our website and do that. It's Be Freaking Awesome, the letter B, freakingawesome.com. And we hope you guys are able to take something from this and shed some light on your money stories and the grief that you might be carrying around money. Until next time, we hope you guys go be freaking awesome.